Good afternoon. My name is Alan McCoy. I am Director of Startup Support at the University of Maryland's Young Ventures. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to everyone who joined us today for the next installment in Startup Fundamentals Workshop Series, both live webinar audience and those watching a recorded version on our Startup UMD YouTube channel. This workshop series is offered by UM Ventures in collaboration from Maryland Technology Enterprise Institute at the Clark School of Engineering and Dingman Center for Entrepreneurship at the Smith School of Business. Everyone attending the live session, please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A function. You should be able to find it at the bottom of your screen. I will be monitoring it throughout the session, and Laura will address all the questions at the end. Unless, Laura, if you'd like to stop at some point and ask me if there are any questions, I can read them to you then. But please feel free to submit the questions or comments throughout the session. Looking forward to your comments as well. Again, we're recording it. Will be posted to Startup UMD YouTube channel. So if you would like, you can submit your questions anonymously. There's a function to do that. So today I am very happy to welcome Laura Neuman to be our speaker. Laura is our longstanding entrepreneur in residence and also a recurrent speaker on a Startup Fundamentals workshop series, workshops. So thank you so much, Laura. Laura has a fantastic and very interesting, amazing story, rising through the ranks in entrepreneurship and building her own career. Thank you so much, Laura. I'll let you take over and talk to us about all of the founder mistakes that you learned throughout your entrepreneurship career, throughout building your companies. Very honored to have you here and looking forward to your session.
Terrific. Thank you, Alla, for having me. It is an honor to be here today. I always enjoy these sessions because it's fun to share the experience as an entrepreneur. And the truth is that when I was a starting out entrepreneur, I went and asked for advice from other people, and they were very generous with their time. And so it is my honor to be able to give back in this way and to encourage the next generation of entrepreneurs. I'm looking forward to jumping into this presentation, but I just want to say a couple of things right off. First of all, this is casual. If you have a question along the way, feel free to jump in, feel free to ask. Reach out to Alla if you want to pause for a minute in the slides to focus on a certain area. I'm open to that. This is for you. This is really about sharing information with you that could be helpful. But first, I'm going to start with a little bit about my background and why I became an entrepreneur, and really, what that journey has looked like for me. I'm going to guess that it'll probably connect with some of you as well. My background started very non-traditionally. We have this idea that people who are successful in business, they follow a certain path, they check certain boxes along the way. And, that is the conventional thinking on business. For me, the choice to become an entrepreneur was really out of a need to create a path to opportunity for myself. I didn't start on a traditional path. In fact, I grew up in inner city Baltimore. Both of my parents were high school dropouts. I felt very disconnected and disenfranchised from opportunity and from, what we would consider traditional access to opportunity. I went to 6 different schools before dropping out of school myself, just like my parents. So I was a high school dropout. And in fact, I didn't go to college. When I went into the world of business, that's where I was starting from. And, truthfully, that doesn't really get a lot of people's attention. My first job in business was answering 800 number calls as a customer service rep. And, that was actually, I was really grateful for that opportunity because before that I had been waiting tables and working in retail. So the idea that I could actually be in an environment that was, with a great company, T. Rowe Price happened to be the company, and get access to this other world that I hadn't experienced for me before was pretty significant. And I loved it immediately. So I knew right away I wanted to be in business and that this should be my journey and my path. But there was a disconnect because my background didn't align with what large companies were looking for. And so for the first 10 years of my career, I spent a lot of time trying to prove myself and to work my way up the organizational org chart. And the truth is that, they struggled to connect my lack of traditional experience with what they were looking for. So I wasn't a candidate for a management training program. But I still worked hard, and I'm a believer in you do every job and you do it to the best of your ability. And so throughout my 20s, while I worked my way up, I could never really break out. And then about 10 years later, when I was 31, I was in a meeting working for a company that I didn't really love working for. It was a direct marketing firm. It wasn't really where I wanted to be, but I had to pay my bills. You know, I had to eat, I had to pay my rent. And so I went into that company every day as if I was working in a bank, which is where I would wanted to work. I dressed the part. I showed up prepared. It was my job to represent my company. And so I did the very best that I could in every meeting. And in one of those meetings, I happened to have a potential client come in, and that client was looking for a direct marketing campaign. It turned out it was Loyola University in Maryland. And they called me after the meeting, not knowing my non-traditional background. And they said, you know, we think you'd be a great candidate for our MBA program. And of course, I wasn't qualified, and it was really difficult for me to call them and say that to them because it was embarrassing. But I was also pretty excited that they saw potential in me. So I ended up meeting with them, and it's its own story. But the truth is, I ended up getting an MBA without finishing high school or college. So they accepted me into their program, and that sort of shifted my journey a little bit and provided more opportunity. So I went back to all those big companies I wanted to work for in my 20s, and I applied again. So the Microsofts of the world, it was the Dells, it was the Apples. I went back to all of them and said, hey, you know, I'm an MBA candidate now. Would you like to consider me? And they all said no again. So I thought, gosh, you know, here I am sitting with what I believe is a lot to offer, and I'm trying to connect that with a path to opportunity in business. And that's when I realized that I needed to consider smaller companies. So my first small company, and I also wanted, by the way, wanted to move into tech. I knew technology was a growing area. I was looking for areas that were growing where potentially my contribution could be noticed. And so I decided I wanted tech and I wanted smaller companies. First small company I went to was Digex. I was at Digex as it was a local company in Beltsville, Maryland. I was hired at the lowest rung again, and I quickly worked my way up. My next company was an internet company in DC, where I had moved up a step to a director position, quickly proved myself, and in fact got Microsoft to endorse our technology in the hospitality industry. Now that was a big deal because this was a really small company in DC. So again, I was trying to like say, look, there's potential here and I need you to think differently about it. And ultimately that company ended up being very successful. We ended up installing our technology in 75% of the hotel rooms in the country. And I led that effort. So I was proving that I could actually make a difference with my contribution. And after that, that company ended up doing an IPO. And after that IPO, what I realized is that I was so focused on proving myself that I didn't really understand the entrepreneurial startup community. They were paying me a decent salary. They were giving me a great title, but I didn't get any equity in that IPO. And so I made it my mission in my next company to have ownership, to have equity. So when we have conversations about equity and ownership and being a founder, that's really personal for me. So I hope some of you will bring some of those questions because I have direct experience in not understanding the importance of it. And then in my next company, really wanting it to be a key part of my compensation. So I went to a company that was started by a couple guys out of NSA after the internet company, Case Internet. And I became the CEO of this new idea, this new company called Matrix. Well, Matrix had a novel or unique approach to RFID technology I wasn't really familiar with before I signed on. But I negotiated a strong equity position in that company because they couldn't pay me a salary. So I took the risk that so many of you are taking. I jumped off the cliff. I cashed in my savings. I cashed in my retirement account. I paid my mortgage on a credit card. I don't recommend that. But I did all of the things that you hear about entrepreneurs doing to take a big risk in order to be successful. And ultimately, that company was very successful. It was sold for a couple $100 million. It was voted Venture Deal of the Year. And it became a case study at Princeton University on entrepreneurship. And I thought, wow, you know, I had made it at that point. And the truth is that as the CEO of that company who took it out of insolvency up to the Series B, you know, that was a huge success. And I left that company with a pretty substantial equity position. Well, you know, that was incredible. But the truth is I could only do that because so many people on that journey helped me understand what I needed to do to be successful as an entrepreneur. I'd pick up the phone and call other entrepreneurs who were successful and say, can I meet with you? And some of my best advice came through those meetings, which is why I'm here today, because I want you to know that you've got to build your ecosystem of support. We hear about the tech ecosystem all the time. Well, you have your personal ecosystem of support, and you need to access those resources to be successful. And count me amongst that with this presentation today. So with that, we're going to jump in. That's how I got into entrepreneurship. That's why I care so much about it. If you know anything about my background, you know I've also been in public service. I held public office, which was truly my honor to do. And so I've seen the government side and I've seen the business side. And I really enjoy this opportunity to talk about idea, innovation, and creation. So we're going to jump in, and these are just my personal experiences with common founder mistakes. We could talk about this all day long. There's a long list of them, but the truth is they're not so much mistakes as these are things that you should sort of be looking out for. We all make mistakes. We don't know what we don't know. But there are some things that happen consistently over and over again from one startup or with one founder to the next. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So with that, let's just jump right in, and feel free to ask questions at any time. We don't have to wait till the end. All right, Ala, how do I advance this to the next slide? There we go. I got it.
There you go.
Mistake number one, not understanding the business you're in. Now, I will say that there have been a lot of presentations about common mistakes with founders, and I've honestly never seen this one on the list. I added it myself and I made it number one for a reason, because I spend a lot of time looking at slide decks of founders who want to raise money, and they'll come up with a great slide deck. And what'll happen is they'll put in there all the great things about their idea or their product, or both, because the idea is not always the same as the end product. I want to challenge you to think about how you approach that presentation, whether it's a slide deck to a potential investor or an elevator pitch where you have a couple minutes of someone's time. What is the problem you are solving? It's not about this great idea you came up with. It's about the problem that you are solving for others. And I will tell you that a lot of times there's a discussion about this is a benefit or this is what we have to offer, and it turns out to be a benefit, but it's not really a product. And so you need to think about it that way. Your slide deck or your elevator pitch should immediately, like within seconds after you say hello, not be about your background, not be about what everyone else is doing, but be about how you are solving a specific problem. And that is the business that you're in. You're in the business of solving problems. And if you're focused on that right from the beginning, there are a couple things that I'm going to tell you. And I know that this is very unconventional. I promise you've never heard this before. If from the very first slide in your presentation, you are not positioning yourself against your competitors, you have failed, in my opinion. If you have to get to a competitor slide in slide 10 or 12, then I think you have you've missed the point and you've lost your audience. From the very beginning, when you're talking about the problem you're solving and a clear demonstration that you understand that problem and how to solve it, you need to be positioning yourself in your competitive advantage. So, this happens in almost every slide deck that I see. And so if there's one thing you take from this, I want you to know that you have a couple of minutes at the beginning of that presentation to capture your audience's attention, whether it's one person or 100. And if you haven't kept them with you for the first 45 to 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes at the most, they're going to pick up their phone. They're going to be looking at their phone and they're going to not be looking at you. So it's not a monologue, it's a dialogue. You need to be in a conversation with them from the beginning so that you can understand what they're looking for in that presentation and make sure that you're aligning the delivery of material to them and keeping their attention along the way. On each of these slides, I'm going to give you specific examples. So I can talk all day long about what you should or shouldn't do as an entrepreneur, but I think it's really important to have specific examples from my personal experience of, how things could have gone differently or some of the things that I learned along the way. Mistake number 2 is thinking you're the only person with this idea. Now, I will tell you, I started a company early in my career, in my entrepreneurial career, I should say, where I had this great idea for rolling out this nationwide delivery of service. It was called a CLEC at the time. And I believed, this was in 1999, 98, 99, I believed that eventually streaming would become the future of delivery of data. At the time, people were doing dial-up and they were looking at AOL. And I thought, gosh, a T1 line, which was really at the time sort of the gold standard for an internet connection, was $1,100 a month. Well, I had this idea that if we could do it a different way, if we had a different delivery mechanism for how we got data into people's homes and businesses, eventually we would be streaming everything instead of putting it on CDs or sending it in other mediums. So that was my big idea, right? Well, obviously, I'm not the only person who had that idea, but I was pretty excited about it at the time. And so I started a company called RadiusNet, and I went out to get funding for that idea. And I secured $90 million in funding commitments. Well, it was a great idea, but I'm not the only person who had it. And there were a lot of other people looking at it at the time. I promise you, any idea you've come up with, other people have come up with as well. And I hear it all the time from entrepreneurs, brilliant founders who are like, no one else knows about this and we're in stealth mode. I promise you someone else has thought about it. What really matters is execution. So if you have a great idea, you've got to make sure that you put the right people around you to make sure it's successful. And there are a couple of things that I heard from venture investors when I was raising money in those early days. One is that, of course, every deal has shelf life. I mean, streaming technology is the norm today. Everybody's doing it. They all have shelf life. But, and it's a big but, if it's a good idea today, it'll be a good idea tomorrow. There isn't such a thing anymore as, gosh, I've got to get this funded immediately, or it's no longer going to be a viable opportunity. What's more important is execution. If it is a brilliant idea and you put the right team in place and you have the right strategy to execute, then that's going to be much more appealing as a package to a potential investor than just your brilliant idea, because he's probably heard that brilliant idea from someone else. And I spend a lot of time looking at pitch decks and, meeting with entrepreneurs. I did it yesterday. I did a due diligence call, and they were so anxious to get out to the market with their great idea. They hadn't fully fleshed out their business model. And so I promise you, if it's a great idea today, on Tuesday, it's going to be a great idea tomorrow. Make sure that you finish the presentation and finish the business plan and strategy before you actually go out to raise money. Mistake number 3, this is one of my favorites, not documenting the business in the early days. So I had the distinct honor of being invited to the executive program at Stanford Business School after my MBA at Loyola, and as a serial then entrepreneur. I was invited out to be with some of the best and brightest from all over the world as we considered the future of business, specifically around technology. I was only one of, I think, 19 women out of 144 people invited to this program that summer. And, we had some of the most amazing professors that you're going to find in this country. And a lot of them were adjunct there. It wasn't your traditional professor lineup that you would find in any university. They brought in speakers like Andy Grove and Condoleezza Rice. And so we got to hear, different perspectives on business. But there's one thing every one of them agreed on. From the earliest days, the most important thing you can do is make sure that you've got the best accountant you can afford and the best lawyer you can afford. And I can tell you, I've been in a lot of companies where, they went with someone who maybe didn't bring the breadth of experience they needed, and you will pay dearly. And I'm going to give you a great example that's personal to me. So in my early days at Matrix, the company I shared with you, where it was an equity deal, they didn't have any money to pay me. So I didn't get paid until I raised the money for all of us to get paid. So when the founders finally got paid is when I got paid. And in those early days, I was there when the company was insolvent. In fact, they had debt and no way to pay it. And they'd made a lot of financial mistakes along the way, including not properly documenting some of the accounting that needed to be done. And one of the things that happened is I negotiated my equity deal with them. The company had no value at the time. In fact, we were in debt. We couldn't even pay for our patent filings at that point. And when I documented that deal, or when I agreed on that deal with them, I didn't document it right away. So we agreed on the deal. We shook hands on the deal, but we didn't document it with a good lawyer. So when we finally got around to documenting it with the right lawyer, the company had a lot more value. Of course, we waited to have a good lawyer until we had some money coming in because we couldn't pay our bills. But now at this point, the company has value. The valuation had gone up. It was set, that new valuation was set by that new investment in the company. And now I had a $40,000 tax bill that I shouldn't have had, because when I negotiated the deal, if we had put it in writing, I would have owed nothing because the stock had no value. That's a very personal example. I finally worked it out with them. We hired really good counsel and we were able to resolve that. But looking back, while the company took care of me and I ended up not having to pay that tax bill, the company paid it. The truth is, if I had had great counsel from the beginning, that stock would have been put in a Roth IRA and I never would have had to pay the same taxes on it because it would have been protected in the Roth. All future earnings would have been protected. If you've done any checking on Peter Thiel and PayPal and how he made all of his money, it's because he had really good counsel from the beginning. I know it's expensive. What he did is put all of his stock into a Roth IRA. Now, I'm not suggesting you do that specifically. I'm only using this example to illustrate the point that nothing beats good counsel. Now, be careful about it, because a good lawyer is going to be $300, $400, $500 an hour. Make sure that you're finding the right person within the firm. And a lot of law firms will give you some free time up front, as will top accounting firms. So I'm just going to encourage you to access those resources. QuickBooks is the best for starting out when you're an entrepreneur. And there are a lot of great entrepreneurial centers, specifically at University of Maryland. They have a lot of resources there. And I encourage you to reach out to Ala to access those resources because they're fantastic. So go to all the presentations. Go into those centers, walk in and ask for help. There we go. Mistake number 5. Did I skip 4? Yeah, mistake number 4. Too much emphasis on stealth versus getting to the market. I really, really enjoy seeing stealth mode on someone's LinkedIn bio. Look, stealth is important. Okay, if you've got a great idea, you want to protect it. And I haven't met a founder out there with a great idea who isn't really concerned about someone stealing that idea. It's a valid concern. There are many stories in the annals of history of brilliant founders coming up with something and then not really getting the benefit of the use of that product over time. I get it. It's a valid point. But what's more important is how quickly you get to the market, because remember, 10 other people have thought of this idea as well. So I'm going to encourage you to very early on decide whether you want to patent or copyright your idea. A lot of people are not doing that now, by the way, because if you file a provisional patent, you're basically making it public information. And then there's this debate now about what prior art is valid or not. So look, if you really have a great idea, be pretty quick about putting together a great team and making sure that you're getting out to the market quickly. Things are happening at a much faster pace today. I am attending investor presentations today for companies that are more an idea than a company, more so than I ever have in my entire career. So just know that the pace is moving, and it's not about being in stealth mode. It's about getting to the market. First to the market often wins, assuming that you have the right team and the right backers. The other thing I will say is that, I recently shared online on my LinkedIn page, I shared a picture of a business plan for a company that I built. And it was kind of fun to share that because, it was one of my early business plans. I sent that business plan to someone I wanted to invest in my company. And I found out that that person actually sent it to other people without my permission. And I was very upset. And so I called him out on it. And I said, look, you don't get to do that. Look, this is the thing. Information is going to be shared. You have to get out there quickly. So I'm going to give you a personal example. In that case, the guy apologized. He gave me my business plan back. I still have his note, which I really appreciated. But when I was very early in with Matrix, the company I mentioned, RFID company I mentioned, I went with the founders. I wasn't even officially on board at that point. I went with the founders out to Silicon Valley to do a presentation on our technology. We went out there and met with a company who had a completely different technology. They were in fluidic self-assembly for displays. Our technology was RFID, radio frequency identification. We presented to the board of directors. It was the founder's idea to go out there. One of the founders wanted to go out there and present, and I was very uncomfortable with it. But we needed money, right? I had to raise some angel money quickly. So I didn't push back hard enough, even though I had some reservations. And we went out, we did the presentation, And something great came out of that because one of the board members there invested in our company, and that person brought a PhD in physics and Nobel Prize in physics. And that was a lot of credibility for us in the early days when we needed it. But what also happened is that we presented to someone who ended up becoming a competitor. They liked our technology so much. This company, Alien Technology, liked our technology so much that they tried to copy it. First, they tried to invest in us with unfair terms. And I said, no, thank you. So what they did is they took all the information from our presentation and they tried to create a competing product. And they became a direct competitor. So, we put ourselves at risk by going out there and looking for money. There's no question it does happen. But you got to be really careful about what you share internally versus externally. We could have done that presentation in a way that protected us a little bit more. I wasn't conducting the presentation, but it was a lesson for me to be super careful, a little more careful and a little more, forceful about what can and cannot be shared. We could have done that presentation with external information only and not shared some of the secret sauce, if you will, the internal documents, and we still would have been protected. So, you have to be careful about what you share versus what you don't share. But this is the thing. Today, everyone's sending email. They're sending attachments. Send only things that you are okay with being public. Investors don't sign NDAs. That's just, if you asked me to sign an NDA, I would likely say no. And it's not that I don't want to sign it. It's that I just see too many deals and too many opportunities. So I don't want to accidentally trip myself up. And you're going to find that from a lot of folks who have a lot of experience. They're going to say, no, I'm not signing an NDA. Just be thoughtful about what you share. Maybe only share things that you want to be publicly available and keep the rest more internal. You can balance that. They expect that. Now, if you're meeting with someone in person, you can be a little more candid because you're not leaving that presentation behind. So I would encourage you to find the balance there. Mistake number 5, viewing institutional investors as adversaries. I've been in adversarial relationships with institutional investors. It can be very challenging. I'm a big believer in fighting for the team that you're on, and I'm always on the company side, or I always have been on the company side. So I've always fought for the company. But the truth is they are not really adversaries anyway. They have a very clear mission. And if you accept their mission, it can be a great partnership. Their motivation is success, financial success. And so they want to win. You have to remember that when you're raising money from institutional investors, they've raised money from someone else and they are accountable to the people who have invested in their fund. None of us, I say this to my kids all the time, nobody gets by without reporting to somebody, right? So if you're an entrepreneur, you're reporting to your board of directors. Your board of directors is, let's just say it's an institutional investor. They're reporting to the people who invested in their fund, right? And then the people who invest in their fund are reporting or accountable to wherever that source of funding was. So everybody is accountable to someone. If you're a founder or an entrepreneur and you're building a company and you're like thinking, gosh, I need some money to get this off the ground, but I don't trust them, understand their motivation. Their motivation is success. Now, they're very clear-eyed about that motivation, and they're going to do ultimately whatever it takes to make sure that that investment is successful. It's not personal, it's business. And so you have to separate the two. That's another lesson I heard over and over and over again at Stanford, at University of Maryland, and from every investor I've worked with. Their motivation is success of the investment. And so if you go into it with that understanding, then you can have a very successful partnership with them. Remove the emotion and focus on what matters at the end of the day, which is making this company successful. I have a fundamental belief that the best people to invest in are people who, founders and entrepreneurs, who will do whatever it takes to make the company successful. I say 2 things about founders and entrepreneurs. You don't know what you don't know, and that's true for all of us, right? Not just founders and entrepreneurs. And the other is just really understand that at the end of the day, you got to understand what your motivation is, right? We're all in it to be successful. Trust but verify. Go out there and find people that you think would be good investors, but then talk to other people who have accepted money from them. If you do your homework and you talk to other people, like I was told at one point, wow, this particular investor you're talking to doesn't keep female CEOs. You're going to get replaced. And I didn't take that seriously enough because I thought I was different. Well, I wasn't. And so you have to be aware of that. It doesn't mean that they'll always do it that way. They may actually shift their thinking on how they invest over time, but at least have the information so you can go in with your eyes open. And fundamentally, you have to decide whether you want to have a bigger piece of something smaller or a smaller piece of something bigger. And I'm sure you've all heard this before, but it is a fundamental requirement in building a company, particularly one where you're looking for outside investment. You will have a smaller percentage of it if you accept money from anyone, and that is a guarantee. But do you want a smaller percentage of a $100 million company, or do you want a bigger percentage of a $2 million company? You have to accept that trade-off. And of course, inherent in that trade-off is giving up control. Because 9 times out of 10, when someone brings institutional money in, especially large amounts of it, they're going to require that they have final say-so on certain decisions. And you just have to understand that going into the conversation. Mistake number 6, assembling our supporters and friendlies instead of a team. Boy, I could tell so many stories on this subject. I will give you an example. I'll give you a couple examples because I always want to be specific about this. One of the companies I worked with where I had a key role, there were 2 founders. The 2 founders came up with the idea. They patented the idea, and they had a third guy who happened to be in the room one day when they were looking at filing the patent. And that third guy, who was not a scientist and did not have the same background or experience, happened to say in that meeting, "Wow, have you ever thought about using this technology for this particular application?" And they're like, "Wow, yeah, we're in agreement. We think that's the best application." And so all 3 of them agreed on that, and they filed the patent that way. They ended up giving this guy 1/3 of their company because he was in the room. He had no experience. In fact, ultimately, when I came into the company, I couldn't find a role for him in the company because he didn't have the skills to do any of the jobs that we needed to fill. Now, I really fundamentally believe that you should hire someone based on their experience and what they contribute and not on their age. But in this case, he was into his 80s and he just didn't understand the technology. He was an older gentleman who didn't have any background in this particular industry. Now, if he had, I wouldn't have not hired him because he was in his 80s, but it was the combination of didn't have the background and wasn't going to learn it. And so it was a very difficult decision. I had to let him go as an employee, but he walked away with 1/3 of the original company. And when that company was sold, he made a lot of money, even though he didn't work in the company and he had made almost no contribution to the company other than being at the right place at the right time for a particular conversation. So that's a great example of, I said I wanted to give you real examples. That's a great example of be really careful about who you bring into the conversation. And I'm going to take that into the next example, which is that there's another company that I was very close to. We were in the same space. The founders of this company raised $55 million in investment. And they raised it from a top venture firm. So this company, they were in the same space I was in. So we were sort of traveling in the same circles with slightly different business plans. And in their business plan, they got a top VC firm to commit to $55 million in starting investment. All the documents were done. Everything was done. The business plan was done. The legal documents were negotiated and signed. Everything was done. They were about to get funded and wire that money, have that money wired into their account. And an email surfaced from someone who claimed co-founder status. And she could prove that she had been in some early conversations and she was going to sue for her portion of that company because she wouldn't agree to what they offered her. They should have negotiated that long ago. That conversation should not have even happened because, go back to earlier slides about documenting. Early on, that company should have documented her role and she should have documented what she was accepting as her percentage of the company on the cap table before any investment came in the door. Now, the founders of that company actually financed the early days. So they put all the capital up. They had the idea. And then this other person who wasn't actually funding the company or hadn't come up with the strategy, but had been in a lot of key early meetings, was able to make a claim that she was entitled to a portion of it. That deal blew up. It literally went away. It disappeared overnight. The company wasn't funded. She didn't get anything out of it. The founders who had put their own personal money at risk, they didn't get anything out of it. The deal was never funded. It literally blew up because no one wanted to deal with a lawsuit out of the gate. So be careful about who you put around you. In those early days of building a company, it's really exciting when people are telling you how great you are and how amazing it is, but you've got to make sure they bring value. And I think there's a tendency to sort of, enjoy that kind of attention. I call them the friendlies. They show up at the meetings and, they're excited about your idea, but what do they truly bring to the opportunity? And then the other final story I'll share along these lines is I was building a company and great founders, great idea, hired a great team. In fact, someone I hired onto the early team improved on the original founder's concept, and that improvement became a new patent, which is ultimately what became our product. What I didn't understand in that company is that the person who comes up with the idea is not the person who turns it into a product all the time. A lot of times you need different experience. And so I had to figure out that I needed to hire an engineer to turn this concept into a product. And that made a full team. That rounded out the team. And I had to hire someone, honestly, that we didn't really love working with. He didn't fit in our culture, but we would have never gotten funded had we not thought outside the box and hired people that we weren't as necessarily comfortable with. I fundamentally believe that the most successful companies are a combination of people who know the industry and have experience in the industry and people who are really smart but don't know the industry and are going to challenge the status quo. And so you want a little bit of both. And when you put that team together, I think you're going to have the best outcome. And again, document early and often. Mistake number 7, confusing angel funding with financial stability. I cannot tell you how many stories I have on spending that early money on crazy things. You don't need a foosball table, I promise you. You don't need to lease cars. You don't need to lease a new office. And by the way, your technology needs to be part of the company. It needs to be in the company because that's where your value is in those early days. You can't license the technology to the company. The company needs to own it or have a licensing agreement with an institution like University of Maryland. A lot of times in these companies, it's kind of like you get $100,000, you get $500,000, and it's like, wow, we're doing great. And money is spent on things that really aren't going to further the strategy and the execution of the business plan. And so that's how you need to think about it is you're not a big company. You're not there for the healthcare. You're a founder. You're an entrepreneur. You're building something. Every single dollar you spend, you should spend it as if it's your own money. And you should spend it as opposed to other people's money. And you should spend it in furtherance of the goals of the organization. If it doesn't support your strategy or your goals, then you shouldn't be doing that. And I'm not going to be specific about where these things happened, but I'll give you a couple of examples because these are wonderful founders and whom I have tremendous respect for. But I have seen a lot of money spent on things that didn't further the goals of the organization. I've seen an office purchased and then leased back to the company in the founder's name. I've seen vehicles leased. I've seen equipment leased, like high-end computers. Those are the kinds of things that aren't really going to make you a valuable company. Every dollar needs to go into furtherance of executing on the business model. So think about it that way. If I make this purchase or if I enter into this financing agreement, is it going to lead to success for this company? Or is it going to make me feel like I've been successful because now I have all these extra perks? Small companies are not about perks. Small companies are about the opportunity to build something of significant value, to change the world and have a financial payoff. That's really what you need to focus on. And you have to figure out if it really is working toward that goal. Mistake number 8, bringing on strategic partners too soon. I get this one all the time. I'll talk to an entrepreneur or a founder, and they'll be like, so-and-so company decided that they'd like to invest in my company, or I'm going to enter into an agreement to sell my product to them. And I'm like, well, what does that agreement look like? And so I am not a huge fan of early strategic money. And I will tell you why. Every time someone makes an investment in your company, they want something. They want a financial return, they want a social return, or they want a knowledge return. There are 3 kinds of returns, and they want one of those 3. I don't know if this has ever been shared somewhere in that very specific way of explaining it, but I really believe there are 3 boxes or 3 categories. They want a financial return, which is who you want. They're the partners you want. Social return, if you're in social entrepreneurship, that's great. And the third is knowledge. A knowledge return says to me that they want to have what you have to offer. Now, they don't want to just pay you for it. They want to own a part of your company. And I'm telling you, there are a lot of stories out there of large companies making strategic investments where they lock up your ability to sell to other people. So they take you out of the competitive market and they inhibit your freedom to operate. I will be candid and say in my early entrepreneurial technology career, I didn't know this term freedom to operate. And I learned very quickly that it is one of the most fundamental things you need to maintain for your company, because if you have the freedom to operate, you can sell to whomever you wish and you can accept money from whomever you wish with the ultimate goal of building a successful company. The minute you take money from someone who has a strategic interest in you as a customer, as an investor, then you are potentially limiting your freedom to operate. And that is something that you absolutely must have to build a big company. And so be very wary of those kinds of investments, even as of those kinds of customers. You want an investor who has the same goal that you have, which is to maximize the return. The outcome is the goal. And remember, institutional investors want a financial outcome. Now, you might also want to change the world outcome. You might have a social outcome in mind, but you need to be aligned with them on their need for a financial outcome. And with that, I honestly could go 20 more, but we're going to limit it to a handful of early mistakes. And hopefully that's helpful for you. And I want to take the rest of the time to be able to answer any questions. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Laura. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure there are a lot more. Maybe we can schedule another session in the coming months.
Absolutely.
But in the meantime, does anybody have any questions? So as a reminder, some of you have been asking, we will be posting this video of the session on our Startup UMD YouTube channel, and I will share the link to that video with everyone. That's an answer to a few questions that came through, but anybody else have any questions? I can also unmute your mic and you can ask your question that way if you prefer. There's a raise hand button that you can press.
I know it's hard to be the one to put yourself out there, but I'm happy to answer anything. This is just a friendly conversation more than anything else. Or you can reach out to me afterwards on LinkedIn, and if I can help there too, I'm happy to.
I can ask you that. So how do you decide what portion of the company? So you had a lot of discussions. So how did you negotiate, and how did you come up with the number? I think I should own X percentage of this company.
You mean when
you're part of a company?
When I'm the one who's going in and saying, okay, I'm going to run this company or be part of this company, how do I negotiate what my position will be in the company?
With everybody else.
Well, I think it depends on what you bring to the table. I mean, when I go into a company, I will be honest and say that I'm looking for a pretty significant position in that company because I know what I'm going to bring to the opportunity. But that really depends on what you have to offer. If you have a Rolodex, if you have, a great network and you can bring funding or you can bring customers, or you fundamentally can think through the strategy of how to turn this idea into a successful product, that's pretty valuable. So I think that's a negotiation in every case. And there have been times where I've been invited to lead a company, for example, and I've been very clear about what I wanted in exchange for that. And the company said no. And in one particular case, I said, look, this is a great idea. I love this idea. I think it's brilliant. I do believe it can be a successful product. I want 20% of the company. And they said no. And the reason I said 20% is not just because I knew what I brought and that I could make it successful. It's because they also had $6 million in debt. So I had to get them out of debt before I could even hit go. And so I knew that was going to be a heavy lift. And so I was like, this is what I'm looking for. And they said no. And they have every right. It's not personal. I didn't take that personally. They have every right in the world to do that. And they never got off the ground. So they brought someone else in who wanted less. And that company never got off the ground. They ended up never building that product, which is a shame because it's still a great idea. If it was a good idea yesterday, it'd be a good idea today. it's still a great idea. And the company still hasn't really, hit its stride. So they never got funded again, other than that 6 million of debt that they now had. Well, it wasn't officially debt. It was $6 million they had accepted. Some of it was in debt and some of it was on the cap table. And it was a very complicated cap table. You have to make that decision. It's not personal. The person who you're considering, they can make their ask. They might negotiate on that and they might not. But at the end of the day, it's a bit of a dating situation where you have to figure out if you're all aligned and you can work together.
Wow.
Hard and fast example.
Yeah, yeah. Here's a question from Adam. Is assembling a team of the right people is the most important thing next to solving a customer problem? How did you go about doing that?
So great question, Adam. I fundamentally believe, and I really strongly believe this, that putting together a great team is about a couple of different things. We talk about culture all the time. Okay, culture is important, but what's also important is the dynamic on that team between people who culturally might be aligned because they have all the same experience in the same industry. But if you don't challenge those folks with other folks who maybe have great experience but are not in that industry, then I'm not sure you would always get your ideal outcome. So I did this where, I was in an industry that was underperforming. And look, these founders, I wasn't the founder. I was the person brought in to turn it into a successful business. These founders had a great idea, but no one was paying attention, not just because of them. I mean, they couldn't raise funding, but the bigger issue was they were in an underperforming industry. Well, ultimately, our approach to solving the problem in that industry made that industry explode. I mean, we fundamentally shifted the thinking in that industry, but that only happened because I brought in people who asked the right questions, right? And so ultimately that led to an entirely new product, and that product is in use today. And it is in use today because fundamentally it was a shift in thinking. And so that creates a little friction. I mean, we always talk about culture, but if your culture is always completely aligned with everyone, I'm not sure you're really challenging yourself. And so I would encourage you to at least consider the possibility that maybe someone with some different experience might come in. Doesn't work all the time. Sometimes that person or persons or group of people, really can't come together and be cohesive with the folks who are maybe traditionally from that industry. That can be difficult. I think that's a leadership problem. And so when this happened in my case and someone came in, they were like, well, you're not used to, they're saying, maybe I shouldn't listen to you because you don't have this experience. I had to sit them all down in my office and say, okay, what's the issue? And they said, we're going to file a patent and we can't figure out whose name goes first. Well, that matters if you're a scientist. And I didn't realize that until then. Leadership is about bringing folks together and solving problems. And, you have to be willing to have those tough conversations. It's an open door policy. I'm not sitting in my office alone. I'm part of this team and I need to make sure that everybody's having mutual respect for each other's perspective and opinion. Now, in that same company, eventually we brought someone in from the outside who really had no experience in early stage companies. He had always worked for large companies. He wanted a big salary. He wanted all the benefits. And we recruited him out of a large company because he brought the credibility we needed to turn our idea into a product. And I understood when I brought him in that it was going to be difficult, but I needed this guy. And so what I did was, almost unbelievable story. What I did was we ended up paying him a huge salary, which we couldn't afford. He got paid more than anybody else on the team, but he didn't care about equity. So he got zero equity. Well, that company had a big exit. And you know what? He had his great salary and other people made a lot of money off of their equity. So, it doesn't always work out the way you think it will, but you have to keep an open mind about it. And you've got to manage those interactions as you're building the team and understand clearly, not just what everybody brings, but how to bring them together. And I think that's something that has to happen every minute of every day. I liked when my teams would go have lunch together and, hang out together and enjoy each other's company outside of the office. That's when you really know you've succeeded, when people like being around each other and working together. There's a mutual respect that goes with that. But just be careful. Be careful about those friendlies or hangers on, I call them, the people who keep showing up, but you're not really clear where they bring value. If you can't clearly identify their contribution, then you might want to think about whether you should bring them on the team or not.
Right, thank you. Does anybody else have any additional questions? Well, if not, I also wanted to let you know that Laura is our entrepreneur in residence, and if a question that you have you'd rather discuss privately, you can also schedule a time with Laura to talk to her one-on-one. So I'll share a link to sign up for time with Laura as well when I send the link to the video.
Well, I want to say thank you to everyone for being here today. And, I certainly welcome hearing from you. And if I can be helpful, I hope you'll reach out. And of course, University of Maryland has incredible resources for support for entrepreneurs. So please check into that and access those resources. It's a great place to be if you're looking for a way to build a company.
Yep, thank you. Big or small, we have it. We have resources for all every type of company. Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you to everyone who attended. And I hope that you will come to additional sessions in the future. Some might be, maybe Laura will agree to do part 2, the mistakes.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you so much, Laura, and thank you to everyone.
Awesome. Take care.
Have a good rest of your day.